Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Some of the nonprofits that help the neediest in our community tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I'm joined tonight by Sally Jones-Hines from MIFA. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And Dr. Kenneth Robinson from United Way of the Mid-South. Thank you for being here.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
And Bill Dries is senior reporter with the Memphis Daily News. So we're doing the show, and most years we've done a show something like this. I think, Sally, you were on a couple years ago. We were talking about around the holidays. This is airing right after Thanksgiving. But I'll start just with this time of year. It's a time when people do tend to focus on how they can help and toy drives and meals and stuff. So each of you, what are the most important things you guys look for and need right now? Then we'll start talking about your mission and things that you do. We'll start with Ken.
Well, we're really, the United Way of the Mid-South, supporting about 79 high-performing nonprofit organizations, and all of our agencies are doing Christmas-related end-of-the-year charities. One of the things we do, which is really fun, is that our Youth United Way come together every year around Christmas. This year on December the 6th, in a partnership with Volunteer Odyssey. They work together to fill up shoeboxes for what we call Shoebox Christmas. We generally adopt a school, it's Getwell Elementary School, and we'll invite everyone this year to come down to 101 South Main, December the 6th, 5 to 8 p.m., and really bring any sort of small gifts for children, elementary age children, help us fill shoeboxes, take them over to Getwell Elementary. It really reminds us, even though that's a focused activity and it's around the Christmas time, it reminds us, Eric, of how much need there is in this community. And of course, United Way of the Mid-South is focused on this year-round. This is our Shoebox Christmas. It's a great time for our teenagers, high school kids to be hands-on, to see themselves tangibly, functionally, really making the lives of elementary school kids better.
Okay, and for you, around the holidays, I mean, obviously MIFA feeds hundreds of thousands, or delivers hundreds of thousands of meals throughout the year, but this time of year, it's probably more poignant and a little more need involved.
Right, as Ken said, need really knows no season. But at the holidays, our seniors in particular, our homebound seniors, that isolation, I think, is more keenly felt when you know that other families are gathering to celebrate. And so many of our seniors we deliver meals to are really isolated, and the volunteer who delivers that meal is the only person a senior may see every day. So it's a wonderful time of the year to volunteer and give. And this year, for the first time at MIFA, we have an online holiday giving catalog, so you can actually go to the MIFA website and see the many things that you can do at the holidays to support MIFA and our mission. And
of course, both of you would say, these are year-round organizations and need doesn't end after Christmas and so on. And you've been at United Way Mid-South how long now?
For about 22 months, but who's counting?
You've talked about poverty, and I don't know that it's changing, but maybe to some degree changing the mission of United Way Mid-South to try to end poverty, and it's a huge goal.
It is.
But why was that the mission that you wanted to pursue, and how is that different than what's been done in the past?
Well, I really appreciate your asking, and again, I appreciate your viewers. At this time of the year, everybody is thinking about what we can do, how we can support, how we can contribute. And of course, let me certainly say, as Sally has mentioned, at the end of the year, when people are thinking about their end of the year donations, go to www.uwmidsouth.org/donate now and give us an end of the year donation. But this need is beyond the Christmas season. We've always focused on education, financial stability, and health. We understand that those are the building blocks. They're foundational to helping individuals move from where they are to points of self-sufficiency. The tragedy in the Mid-South, and I think so many organizations are aligning around this, is that the poverty numbers are not decreasing significantly from year to year, and we'll celebrate the fact that we now have 43% of our children compared to 47% of our children living in poverty, but we're all embarrassed by that. We know that families are stuck in poverty, 23% of the people in the Mid-South. And so the United Way decided that in addition to focusing on those building blocks and products and services and programs and outputs from our agencies that are providing extraordinary services around pre-K literacy, third grade literacy, high school completion, helping us really address issues of child abuse, domestic violence, really getting persons who really need to understand financial literacy, get that financial education, but pulling it together and moving individuals and families from where they are so that they don't have to come back year after year and access the same services, the same programs. So our new approach is really to connect the dots between those programs and those agencies, build some collective impact among our agencies, and literally work with individuals and families to hand off from one program, from one agency to the next, to help individuals advance out of poverty towards a point of self-sufficiency. It's honing our priorities, but it's focusing on a collective impact model, which is much more relevant to a United Way.
And we'll go deeper into some of those elements of that because it's very fascinating. But I want to talk to Sally too. I mean, some of what you do must be sort of reactionary. You find out about a homeless family that's about to, or a family that's about to be homeless. You find out about a senior who is, not being cared for. And that's a fantastic thing that MIFA does and other organizations do. But this idea of how do you bring down systemic poverty and systemic need? I mean, is that or can that be a part of the mission of MIFA?
Well, it is, and it really is because we are focused on keeping families in their homes. And oftentimes that intervention can be as small as utility assistance that really does the job. A family has an unexpected medical expense or some other crisis, and they just need that little bit of help to get over that bump in the road. So often it is our philosophy to do, if we can help with a Band-Aid, we help with a Band-Aid instead of performing major surgery. Sometimes a family, as you said, the saddest thing is when I walk into MIFA in the morning and I see a family there with all of their luggage. And you know that they have been on the street perhaps the night before. And our rapid rehousing program works very quickly, and with other agencies, as Ken has said, with the agencies that run emergency shelters, we work very closely with those agencies to get a family into immediate shelter if we need to, but then as quickly as we can into permanent housing. Because that sense of stability and children being able to attend school where they have been attending school is really part of the solution, I think, to addressing poverty.
Yeah. Bill.
So Sally, how important is it for someone to have that stability, and how much easier does it make sort of a bridge to something beyond just maintaining what they have?
I think, well, of course, that stability takes that enormous worry away of where am I going to sleep tomorrow? Where is my next meal coming from? But the key, I think, then is those wraparound services or those additional services. And we have family housing advocates who work with those families when we get them into their permanent housing to direct them or connect them to financial literacy, to behavioral health resources, to whatever those other things are that they need. But it's the family's choice to access those.
Right.
And can you think about then the needs of a family such as that Sally just mentioned? That family has a variety of needs. A panoply of services need to be applied to that family. There are issues with employment, issues with income stability, perhaps adult childhood literacy. The children may or may not be performing well in school. There may be behavioral health concerns. There may be physical health concerns. There may be the need for rehab services. And so the reality is that we've got 2,500 nonprofits in Memphis. We have almost 80 high-performing nonprofits that we support. And we have extraordinary agencies like MIFA that is really providing an extraordinary set of services to people with a particular need. The challenge becomes getting everybody to play in the sandbox together, being able to understand, have visibility in terms of what other programs and agencies might be out there, and providing the warm handoffs for a family such as this, so that they who have needs in multiple domains might be getting those needs met by multiple agencies, each of which does one thing perhaps extraordinarily well, but linked together can help a family that has dreams have that dream driven to fruition. It's just very difficult for folks that are stuck.
And it's also difficult, I would imagine, that if you've avoided having to sleep in the car, if you've avoided having to sleep on the streets, and you get a longer term look, then you look at all of these organizations, and it's almost an embarrassment of riches in terms of these organizations that we have. But if you're able to get to the next step, you look up and suddenly it must be overwhelming. Where do I go to next? What organization does what for me?
Can you think about the difficulty in navigating that morass of agencies, each of which, again, can function extraordinarily well, but for a person who's trying to self-navigate, it becomes overwhelming. There are many, many doors. Which door is next? How to really create a narrative for their own lives. And yet we have agencies that do case management. MIFA is a classic example of an agency that has an oversight and an overview of some of the potential supported services that might be out there. But there are so many doors through which people and clients in need and families enter, and once they receive their services, then they're stuck. And so the concept of driving the dream and what the United Way is doing is to create a matrix of agencies, to create a shared data platform, to change the culture of individual agencies so that frontline workers think about what is the next step? How can we help point, direct, guide that individual and family so that they don't have to make it up as they go along? Makes sense.
Several Christmases ago, I was at a church in Bartlett, and that church was hosting several families who had nowhere else to spend Christmas. And it was a reminder that we have perceptions about where the need is in this community, and the need, as you both know, is not hard to find, but it's also in places where we might not think it is. So give me the experience of your overviews in how pervasive this problem is.
We have mapped, obviously, our home delivered meals, and I think people really are surprised to realize it's all over Shelby County. We deliver meals in Collierville. We deliver meals in Bartlett. A home delivered meal is not necessarily based on poverty. It may be a disability or some other reason that a senior doesn't have access to food, but it's really county-wide. It might be someone next door to you. So.
Right.
And of course, certainly we do know of the high poverty areas in which there is a concentration of need. The Women's Foundation doing an extraordinary job around 38126, Methodist Foundation 38109. I worked for 25 years in 38106. But there are individuals who are self-identifying their need by walking through the doors of United Way agencies. And you will recognize that in a place like Memphis and Shelby County, they are literally coming from all throughout the area. And of course, we serve the Mid-South, 3 counties in Mississippi, Crittenden County across the river in Arkansas, and Fayette, Lauderdale, and Tipton County as well. So the need is very pervasive. And we want to disabuse ourselves of the notion that it's just in a couple of communities in the Mid-South. And we see people coming from all throughout the Mid-South into the door of one agency or the other. A few questions asked poignantly, perhaps for the first time. Where would you like to go? What's the next step? What are your dreams? Suddenly identify individuals who may not be from 38126 or 38109, that there is a need, there is an ongoing need to connect them to a multitude of other services. You're right, it's not geo-specific, certainly concentrated in some areas, but not as unique to those areas as one might think.
Sally, MIFA does so much work with seniors, and something one of you just said, you know, we've got this aging population. People talk about the baby boomers retiring. Some of that was maybe delayed because of the Great Recession, but, you know, the demographics are what they are. And so when both of you were talking before the show about, you were at a session doing some things about thinking about the future, thinking way down. That's got to be heavy on your mind.
It is.
Given this aging population and, you know, these statistics on people who maybe are middle income, lower middle class. I mean, they're not in poverty, but they have put almost no money aside. I mean, all those numbers are really daunting and must be, you know, the amount of senior care, the amount of meals you deliver. Your thoughts on that?
Well, and of course, we have been pleased the last couple of years that with some support from the Plow Foundation, we have been increasing our home delivered meals. We think the need is still greater in Shelby County than we are meeting, but we are growing toward that need. We do over 2,000 meals a day at MIFA every weekday, and the majority of those are home delivered, close to 1,800. So, but we worry that need is going to continue to increase, and how do we sustain that growth? Volunteers are a key part of that. We really could not be delivering those meals if we had to pay to deliver them. So it's so important to have additional volunteers. We have about 2,000 volunteers a year that do a variety of things. Home delivered meals, we have about 70 or 80 a day who come. But just as you said, aging, our volunteers, many of them are aging too, because we've had people who have been delivering meals for 20 plus years, and so we need both the sustaining the service, and we need to sustain our volunteers.
One more thing on aging and this baby boomer population. I didn't know, I will admit that you all do advocacy work within long-term care facilities. Talk a little bit about that, because people, again, you're so and rightly associated with Meals on Wheels, but this advocacy for seniors.
Right, the long-term care ombudsman program. It's a federally funded program that every area has an ombudsman, so that nursing home or assisted care living residents have access to someone to advocate for them. It is also volunteer dependent, because we just have one staff member and he could not visit every facility. So we utilize an army of volunteers who visit every facility and let the residents know that they are there for them.
Yeah, go ahead, Ken.
And you know, I just think your question speaks to the fact that there is just a huge burden of need. We touched 650,000 individuals last year. I mean, think about that. 650,000 individuals served last year by United Way of the Mid-South agencies and programs. And so not only are we dealing with the burden and the magnitude of the current senior population, but you're thinking about all of that mass of humanity coming up through the pipeline that are accessing services today. And when you think about that, and the fact that the statistics of poverty are such and fairly intractable, then the need is not going away without very definitive, assertive, aggressive, intentional, collaborative efforts. And I think that's why we're so proud of a MIFA that understands the value of networking. And it is why we have focused our efforts a little bit on improving the efficiencies among agencies and improving the capacity to act collaboratively.
Yeah. Bill.
Sally, you talked about rapid rehousing. It's been a few years since our efforts toward the homeless shifted in that direction. How has that transition been going?
The success rate is great, and the success is measured by how many of those families fall back into the system and access services again. And right now we show that over 90% of the families who have been rapidly rehoused have not gone back and asked for additional services. So they are still in the homes in which they were placed.
So what does that tell you about that particular sector of the homeless population? Because so often we hear that there is the need for wraparound services in addition to housing in order for this to be a permanent solution.
Well, I hope it tells us that they are beginning to access these wraparound services, and also that, you know, so many times it is that crisis that any of us could face, and that really families are resilient. They have dreams, as Ken said. They want to succeed. They want to provide for their children, and you know, it's not that idea of what's the word I'm looking for, but undeserving. You know, it really is, the dreams are there.
And it's fascinating. I've had the privilege of building housing, permanent housing for 111 families over there in South Memphis. And people have the dreams, but oh my goodness, the pathway to getting someone either eligible as a low to moderate income family for a very modest home, or getting someone out of substandard rental multifamily housing into standard higher quality rental housing. That pathway is just fraught with challenges for people that really don't know how to do it. To your earlier question, Bill, can't navigate the multiple needs that they have, who are beset by really everything at the bottom of Maslow's pyramid in terms of the challenges that they're facing. And so it sounds easy to people who have some capacity, but getting them in permanent housing, supportive housing, is huge. Keeping them there with all of the needs is what requires even more than a great agency like MIFA.
About 5 minutes left. Go ahead, Bill. Go ahead, Bill.
Talk to me about how your time as a church pastor in South Memphis at St. Andrews informed what you do at United Way.
Thank you very much. 35 years as a pastor in communities that look very much like the community in which I grew up, African American, under-resourced, low to moderate income families. But understanding these are real individuals, real families, persons with dreams, aspirations, hopes, children. But where there are communities that have been disinvested for years and generations, where there are no banks, where the education system has been challenged, those families living in distressed housing just often get overwhelmed. And so as a pastor, understanding that it's critical to be relevant to the needs of individuals. These are not people that are undeserving. These are not people that are shirking. These are not people that are unwilling to do, but having the heart to help people with their dreams, achieve their dreams, overcome the obstacles, move through the closed doors, navigate a plan and a process. That's what pastoring is about. It's about shepherding a flock. And at United Way, in another way, this is ministry for me. It is about helping people move to self-sufficiency from points of dependency in their lives. We can do this as a system.
It's been an election year, and there was an election a couple weeks ago. You may have heard. And we don't do a lot of national politics, but it was an interesting national dialogue. I mean, about issues of inner cities, issues of need, of people feeling like the government was failing them, and clearly, I'm not going to break down the election, but clearly that was one big voice that how Donald Trump won was people feel like these things that happen again and again, and economic fears and economic problems aren't going away. You all in your work see people's economic fears up close and personal. Do you see any change in tone? I mean, again, it's the federal level, but you're also both probably get a certain amount of federal funding. So again, thoughts on the, you do, okay, yeah. So you do. So thoughts on, again, I don't want to break down the, voting in Pennsylvania, but your thoughts on the tone and your thoughts on the direction and how this impacts your work potentially.
Yeah. In watching the election returns, the eve of the election day, I did immediately go to what does this mean for MIFA? Not just me, but for MIFA. We do get a sizable federal funds through HUD and also through the Older Americans Act. Those needs are growing, so I just, am hopeful that...
those funds do Meals on Wheels? Or?
Older Americans Act does Meals on Wheels, transportation for seniors, and then HUD, our rapid rehousing, and those things come through there.
So it is interesting that how you talk about cuts in federal spending, and we spend too much, we spend too little, but I mean, it is, it's kind of helpful to bring it down to it's a meal for someone who lives in Bartlett, and can we afford, I mean, there's, because the national discussion is a lot of yelling and a lot of, these are big dollars and deficits. you all live with it, and agencies like you across the country live with this. This is a home and a person
there's a face
that a
to
volunteer
this, yes.
talks to once, twice, 7 times a week. So you were going to say something.
And this is
Just
really
cut myself.
an important affirmation of the need for government funding. So one of our emerging partners is the Department of Human Services, and we would say sustainable funding to sustain efforts like this for this tsunami of low to moderate income families who spoke at the point of the election suggests that this is not a time for retrenchment and diminution of that flow of federal funding. We need federal funds to come alongside the extraordinary private philanthropy, the extraordinary corporate philanthropy, and the small army of 45,000 donors and volunteers that support United Way. But sustainable funding for that huge cohort of our national population and for us locally comes in many ways through federal, through state and local governmental sources. The election affirmed for me, as I said to my board this morning, that our focus on low to moderate income families is the right focus at the right time for the right reason. And it has very much reinforced what we're doing at United Way.
We just have maybe 45 seconds left. And we were walking in here. I'm going to shift gears completely. You went to college with Gwen Ifill, who
Yes.
died. I think anyone who watches this show either watches Washington Week for all these years, is into politics. It's public television. But I didn't know that you all. So just put you on the spot. Some
I knew
thoughts on
Gwen from our college days. We were in Cambridge together and went to church together. And so I would say more than anything, Gwen was a preacher's kid. She's a marvelous woman of faith, a woman of great capacity and skills. And to see her, to have known her from her early years, and to see her tremendous impact in the media and her presence and the ethics that she brought to her craft made me very, very proud.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for saying that. Thank you both for being here. Thank you for the work you do. Thank you, Bill. Thanks for joining us. Join us again next week. That's great. Thanks. Thanks for